Jonah's great fish. How could Jonah survive inside the fish's belly? Here we notice that Jonah chapter 1 ends with a great fish prepared by God to swallow Jonah. And since there are many who encounter difficulty in understanding how this could happen, and how Jonah survived inside a fish's belly for 3 days, we have to give some attention to this case and try to make sense of his survival. But before we try to find explanations and solutions, we first have to accurately read the biblical text to avoid any wrong explanations that may oppose the Bible. The Bible says, "Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." Jonah chapter 1 verse 17. A very specific fish God prepared for a very special role. Now, in order to reach the right explanation for this story, we consider 2 main approaches. The first will be to reach a scientifically based explanation. Therefore, we are testing now 4 main assumptions. Assumption 1. In the fish's mouth. Some people assume that Jonah was not actually swallowed by the fish, but he only remained inside its mouth. But this viewpoint opposes what's written in the Bible, since the Bible mentions that the fish did swallow Jonah. And the Bible reassures this fact, saying that Jonah was inside the fish's belly, not the fish's mouth. Assumption 2. A 4-chambered stomach. Some people admit that the fish swallowed Jonah but assume that this fish belongs to a whale species that has a 4-chambered stomach, similar to the stomach of the ruminant. But the first chamber of the whale's stomach differs in function than that of the ruminant's. Since in ruminant its function is to break down cellulose, while in this whale species, it breaks down chitin, which is found on the fish's body from the outside. And as the first chamber has a thick muscular wall, its second main function is to break down and grind the prey, playing the role of the teeth. This assumption solved the problem of the gastric juice and how could a man endure it, because the first chamber doesn't include any acids in this case. But we are now facing another 2 problems. The first one is the breakdown and the grinding of the prey, while the second one is the absence of oxygen. Then how could a natural human endure them both? Assumption 3. Jonah's death. Some people assume that Jonah died inside the fish's belly, then God brought him back to life again. But this opinion contradicts the Bible's account. Since Jonah chapter 2 shows us Jonah fully conscious while praying to God. In addition to that, this assumption is built on a supernatural intervention in bringing Jonah back to life again. However, you will find that this supernatural side is exactly what the owners of this viewpoint are trying to avoid and deny in Jonah's story. Assumption 4. Historic evidence. Some people are searching for stories that are recently recorded about people swallowed by fish and survived. Despite the existence of these stories, we question their authenticity and honesty. And this shall take us to the second approach in explaining the survival of Jonah in a fish's belly, which is the miraculous explanation. This approach is built on 3 evidence. Evidence 1 is the declaration of Jesus himself when he was on earth in Matthew 12:39 and 40. But he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." And here Jesus referred to Jonah's story as a sign, which means it was a miracle. And this is a very clear absolute declaration of the Lord himself. That Jonah's survival in the fish's belly for 3 days was done by the miraculous supernatural power of God. Evidence 2 is the theme of the book of Jonah. We notice that over 9 miracles are recorded in this book. And surely, we cannot scientifically explain these works, saying that nature did these on its own. Miracle 1 was when God talked to Jonah with a direct declaration, for as we know from episode 1 that it was an entirely spiritual work that the matter cannot interpret. Miracle 2 was the great wind God sent out upon the ship. Miracle 3 were the lots they cast and how God intended to make it fall on Jonah. Miracle 4 Was when the sea suddenly ceased from its rage the moment Jonah was thrown into it. Miracle 5. When the Lord prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. Miracle 6. Was when God commanded the fish to vomit Jonah out. Miracle 7. Was when God prepared a plant. And how it grew in a very quick and supernatural way. Miracle 8. Was the worm which God prepared to damage the plant. And the final miracle was the vehement east wind which God also prepared with a very specific design and purpose. Finally, evidence 3. Which is God's character. For God throughout the history intervenes for the good of His people, to protect and preserve them. Sometimes with ordinary ways, others with extraordinary ones. Now we are mentioning 2 out of many stories that show how God intervenes with extraordinary ways to save His people. First one is the story of the 3 Jewish men who were thrown into the fiery furnace. And how it's written about them in Hebrews chapter 11 that they quenched the violence of fire. We notice that God didn't put out the fire, since it burned those who took up the 3 men into the furnace. But in a miraculous way that has no scientific base, the fire had no power upon their bodies. And the second one is the story of the bronze serpent. That time when the one who was bitten by a serpent died from its venom. Except the one who looked at the bronze serpent, he lived, even though he was bitten. And surely just looking at the bronze serpent has no scientific base in stopping the action of the venom in their bodies. Finally, we are now certain that the best explanation of how Jonah survived in the fish's belly for 3 days and 3 nights is an absolute miraculous intervention of God in order to save His prophet.